Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Right, we are continuing with the mas'ala of like we said ad-dimar, yeah, which is basically wealth that has a person has no access to. Yeah, so mal dimar, type of wealth that you don't have access to it. So the Hanafis say there is no zakat on the past years if you get it back, whereas according to Shafis there is. And we said our main argument was that this is considered to be something which is no qudra. Yeah, and we said this was the main sort of like point of difference between us and the Shafis. We say just like you have to have the sabab, which is you have to have mal nami. We said that mal can only be nami, can only be productive wealth if there is the ability to be able to use it. If a person has been unable to use that wealth, then we say that person does not have qudra. If the person does not have qudra, then we say that mal is not nami, it's just mal. Yeah, and some of the examples that we gave were like, money that has been thrown in the ocean, and then you found it later on, or for example, like someone who has run away, slave, or a slave who has gone astray, absconded, maghsoob. All these things we said fall under dimar. Yeah, so the main point to take away from this was the idea that mal has to be tasarruf. And then Imam Shafi actually gives an example where he says, look, sometimes you might have mal, but you don't have access to it. So, but you still have to give zakat on it. And he gives the example of the traveler. So the response to the traveler one was that we say, وَابْنُ السَّبِيلِ يَقْدِرْ بِنَائِبِهِ. The Ibn Sabil, the traveler, let's say for example, like I've got £10,000 in my bank account, and I go on a journey, and I'm on this journey for let's say 5 years. 5 years have gone by, and I don't have access to that money. As in, I am obviously, in the olden days, you have to understand there wasn't like bank cards or anything like that. So if you were physically remote from your money, your wealth, you had no access to it. So the argument was that you don't have access to it, but you can actually appoint someone to be your naib. You had that power, whether you did it or not. That's a different story. But you had the power to make someone else your naib, someone else your representative, you can say agent, wakil. So let's say I've gone to Australia. I'm there for 5 years. I don't have access to my money, but I was able to leave someone behind. Now, obviously, here this opens up like lots of questions that should come to your mind. Yeah. For example, like let's say I go to Australia and I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a desert. I don't have access to a phone. I don't have access to anyone else to tell. So in this case, what do I do? And I don't really have anyone at home that has access to my wealth. Only I have the access. So this obviously brings the question up then, does that mean you don't have qudra? Yeah, because you don't have a naib. Or do we say that theoretically you could have had a naib? Like theoretically, you could have told someone before you traveled, right, to take care of all your financial affairs. But you didn't. And then that's your shortcoming, and then therefore you still have to give your zakat the past years. Or do we say no? We say the person in the middle of a desert doesn't really have access to any way of communicating with the people back home. And even if he does, he doesn't have anyone there that can take care of his wealth. So again, these are the kind of questions that should come to your mind. When you're reading fiqh texts, one of the things to understand is when the fuqaha bring a scenario, because each masala is called a masala, isn't it? A masala is from su'al. It's a question. So when the fuqaha bring scenarios, when they bring masail, the mas'ala is simply just one representation or one discussion that they had. It does not mean that it's no longer open, like it's no longer something that we can further delve into. Yeah. And I think this is the thing that when you teach fiqh and you don't allow your students to be able to think, or you don't present them like furu, yeah, extended masail from that particular masala, using that masala as the masala of the fuqaha, and then branching out and asking sort of like, hypothetical questions. What if this had happened? Or what if this had happened? What if this had happened? That is what creates inside of students faqahat, from my own personal experience. Yeah. So if you're ever going to teach fiqh, I would definitely recommend that whenever you're teaching fiqh, you'll need to have training in this and experience. But this is what you need to do. You need to be able to open up to the student all the possibilities of that masala. Yeah, and this is where, once you do this, the benefit of this. So this is, obviously the primary benefit of this is it gives the students the ability to do tafaqquh. Tafaqquh literally means like you exert the ability to understand. Yeah, takalluf al-fahm. So you're forcing the student to think. Yeah, and the brain's kind of like working, and you kind of think, okay, what about this though? And what about this? Yeah. Now there are some masail, like for example, I guarantee you, some of you guys, there are some masail that you guys have in your head, and you have loads of sort of like questions pop up in your head. And that's good as well. So you've got like tafaqquh in certain areas of fiqh. So there'll be like certain masail, tafaqquh will come in there. But you need to have tafaqquh in all masail. Like you need to create this, develop. So this is why like this Ibn Sabil masala, it can be developed more, it can be opened up more. Anyway, so Ibn Sabil, what do we say? Yaqdir binaibihi. So we say he is capable with his naib. So you see what we've done here? Imam Shafi has used the Ibn Sabil masala to prove his point. What was his point? That a person who does not have access to their wealth but owns wealth, they have to give zakat. And he uses example as a musafir doesn't have access to his wealth but still has to give zakat of the past years. And we use the same masala to prove our point. This is where it's very important to differentiate between, like what we call amthal, ashbah wa nadha'ir. Ashbah wa nadha'ir. Ashbah and nadha'ir basically is like a kind of a skill that you have to train yourself in ifta. If you're doing ifta, if you're doing fiqh, you're trying to look for a resemblance between masalas. So, I mean, this is something you can do in your own time. If you want to send it to me, you can send it to me as well. I can check through it. And by the way, I've checked through the assignments that some of you guys have sent back to me, mashallah, very good. I'm going to leave some feedback as well on each one. So what you can do is, you have a piece of paper, you draw a line in the middle, and then you try to come up with sort of like, you don't have to draw one line, you can be like columns, and you try to bring a masala, and then what you do is, you juxtapose it with other masail, and you try to see similarities and differences. This is a very, very, very important skill for muftis to have. Like, this cannot be emphasized enough. Yeah, because sometimes I've seen this myself. Some people give fatwas, and unfortunately, when you look into the fatwa, it's a very, very broad fatwa. Yeah, it hasn't been looked at properly. Yeah, and I mean, one second, let me just open the window. I mean, an example of this would be like similar things that we see nowadays. Yeah, for instance, like if a man and a woman are in a room together, non-mahram, man and a woman in a room, right? So write that down. Okay, so man and a woman in a room together alone, right? With no reason at all, just mutlaq. Then draw in the other column, write down, okay, a man and a woman are in a room but for an job interview. Then do another one, man and woman are in a room together but there's it's like glass all around. Then another one, man and woman in a room together but there's a camera in the room, CCTV. Does that make sense? And you can carry on. Man and woman in a taxi together. So the point of this exercise is, what you do is you develop inside yourself the ability to find differences, spot the difference exercise. You spot the differences. And if you can spot the differences well enough, you can identify the illah in the original masala, and then you can see whether that illah exists in other sort of like scenarios as well. Yeah. So that's why it's, these kind of things, I personally think in a lot of like fiqh classes and iftar classes, I think this is missing. Although they do teach ashbah and nadha'ir in many places, but I think this is more important for students to be able to identify differences. Similar, like another thing I was thinking about the other day was things like, like if you have a ring on, I think I mentioned this masala. If you have a ring on, and you're doing wudu, you have to move the ring for water to get underneath. or take it off, whatever, so the water can get to the skin underneath. Now, what if, like, now we use that as the masala and we say, okay, what about having paint on your hand? Is having paint on your hand the same as having a ring on? Or for example, like waterproof, like makeup, waterproof makeup. Is having waterproof makeup the same? And what about like grease? Like having grease, you've eaten something very greasy, got it on your hands. You do wudu and it's clearly kind of just rolling off the grease. It's not really, or you've got like some, some cream on your hand or something. I don't know. Yeah, and then you kind of like look at the differences between these. Yeah, so all of this again, it's all about this. So the same thing over here. We're saying there's a difference between the Ibn Sabil Masala and what Imam Shafi is saying. Ibn Sabil Masala, it's not a proof because Ibn Sabil, he actually does have the capability of getting someone else, like a naib, an agent, to deal with his financial affairs. Okay. وَالْمَدْفُونُ فِي الْبَيْتِ نِصَابٌ. There's another masala. What if someone buries something in their back garden? Like obviously it says bait over here. Bait in the olden days meant like your room. Yeah, bait in the classical sense is a room. So dar is like a house. So nowadays when we have a house, classical fiqh would call that a dar. So let's say for instance like someone has a bait, like just like a single room or like and that obviously remember in the olden days they didn't really have cement on the ground. It wasn't really cemented. It was just, and so someone in their bait has dug something in their bait, just like for safekeeping. So they dug a hole in their bait. They put some their wealth in there. And the other thing you have to understand is in the olden days they didn't used to have a bank system. Bank system actually came much later in the world and in the Islamic world as well. So a guy has a big room and he's dug a place in his room and he's buried some of his wealth. Yeah. So what happens? Is this treated as dimar, mal dimar? Yeah, you buried it there. So he says no, it's not. Yeah, mal al madfunu fil bayt, that mal which is buried in the house is actually called nisab. It actually is a threshold. You have to give zakat on it. Why? So he differentiates between. Remember, we said the mafaza in the wilderness, in the countryside. Yeah. So there's two guys. One guy has buried something in his own house, and one guy has buried something in the countryside somewhere. He's gone in the car, gone somewhere in the countryside, dug a hole, put his wealth there. The one in the countryside is malud dimar. Yeah. If he forgets the location of it, and then 10 years later finds the location, he doesn't have to give zakat in the 10 years has passed. The one in the house, he has to give zakat. So what's the difference between the two? So he says the difference is لِتَيَسُّرْ الْوُصُولِ إِلَيْهِ. That's the main illah, which is the reason why we said malud dimar, there's no zakat, because there was not the possibility of getting access to it. Yeah, qudra was not easy, it was difficult, it was hard to get to. And over here, qudra is easy. So tayassur al-wusul, being able to get to that mal, is actually something which is easy. So that seems to be now the point we can use. However, some of the other Hanafis have actually discussed this masala. Although Sahib al-Hidayah has actually given preference to this, other Hanafis have actually said, well, if mal is in your property, like let's say you got a big property, you buried mal somewhere, but you can't remember where you buried it. Now, if you have to dig up your whole property, this would actually cause haraj because your house is going to be destroyed. So would the Sharia, now this is where the issue comes down, would the Sharia want you to get access to that wealth no matter what happens, even if you spoil your house? Yeah. Or would the Sharia just say, actually no, we'll treat it as mal dimar? Does that make sense? Similarly, for example, let's say someone, I don't know, hides something in a wall or something. I don't know. People might when they're building the house, they hid some money there or something for safekeeping or whatever. And they left it, now they forgot where it is, and they have to tear down all the walls now, rip all the walls open, the ceilings, to find that wealth. So you see how the fuqaha were looking at it. They were saying, well, do we now consider the accessibility to be priority even if it results in a person damaging their own property, wealth? So that's why some of the fuqaha said no. Yeah, and that actually makes sense. Okay, so he says the wealth that's buried in the property, you can get access to it. Okay. وفي المدفون في الأرض. Okay, what if mal has been buried in ard, yeah, outside in the garden. Yeah, we're talking about garden. This was the house. Now what about your back garden? Yeah. So fil ardi, meaning when they say ard, they're talking about like owned property, okay? Yeah. Um, not public property. Okay. So madfun fil ard. Oh karam. Oh karam basically refers to like vineyards. Yeah, so like someone has a vineyard in the olden days, they might have had like vineyards require large amount of land. So someone has buried in a vineyard or anywhere. It could be. It doesn't have to be a vineyard. It's not like it only applies to vineyards because vineyards are special. No, it could apply to um, orchards as well. It could apply to anything else. What happens over there? So he says, اختلاف المشايخ. Later Hanafis, the Mashayikh have actually done ikhtilaf in this masala. Yeah. So in other words, whenever it says ikhtilaf, that means there's two groups. One group says they treat it like dimar. You don't have to dig it all up. And the other group says, no, because it's in your property, it's in your own land. It's like the house masala, yeah, your own room. You go and dig it all up. So again, if you look at the hashi over here, hashi just gives a khulasa of it. قيل تجب الزكاة. Some of the mashayikh, they actually said that zakat becomes necessary. Why? لأن حفر جميع الأرض المملوكة ممكن. Yeah, because their understanding was digging up all of your land is actually something that's possible. Yeah. فلم يتعذر الوصول إليه. Therefore, the ta'azzur, the difficulty of getting access to it is not there. It's non-existent. Yeah. فصارت كالدار. So this becomes like the dar masala, the bayt masala. But like I said to you, is this something that the Sharia would want from us? And that's why the second group said لا تجب الزكاة لأن حفر جميعه متعسر, because digging up your whole property could be difficult. And if you notice over here, you could understand why the ikhtilafs come about. Most likely what's happened is the first position, the houses that they used to have, the land that they used to have was small, accessible, easy, right? And the second group might have looked at, for example, large properties, having to dig up the whole thing. And that's why sometimes fatwa is different as well. So sometimes scholars would give fatwa on one because in their times that was the case, and in other times maybe the masala changed. Well, haraj madfu'un, and this is like a qaida kulliya, which is al-haraj, hardship in Sharia is something which is repelled. Yeah, so like we mentioned, la yukallifullah, Allah would never burden a person when they can bear. As opposed to in your own property, in your own bayt and dar, is saying, well, that's something which seems to be possible. Okay. All right. Let me just see if I want to mention something on this. Yeah. So this is in Bahar. He says اختلف المشايخ في المدفون في أرض مملوكة أو كرم فقيل بالوجوب. Some of the Hanafis have said that it's necessary to give zakat in your own property, in your own garden. وقيل لا لأنها غير حرز. He mentions another point over here. He says basically that, which this is another good point as well, which is outside property is not protected. Inside property is protected. Yeah. So if, for example, like you bury something outside and now you've forgotten where it is in your garden, there's a chance that someone could have got into your garden, dug it up and taken it away. That's possible, that is. Or if you have like allotments, just like you might have an allotment, right, where in the UK people have allotments. You've left it there, someone's gone and done some digging, they found that toilet's treasure and they've taken it away. So these are things that are possible. So this is a good point that Ibn Nujay mentions as well. Yeah. Okay, was there anything else? Okay. All right, so next. So then he says, وَلَوْ كَانَ الدَّيْنُ عَلَى مُقِرٍّ مَلِيٍّ. So remember last time I told you about the masala of Zafar owes me £1,000, and then I say, I don't have any proof to prove it. 10 years goes by, eventually Zafar sort of like confesses that he does owe, then what happens is I don't have to give the 10 years. I just have to give when I receive it back. I just have to start giving it from then. So, but what about if I owe, or I was owed, Zafar owed me money, and he is mali. Mali means he is like wealthy. He has the money. Yeah. So ghani. Muqir means that he is openly admitting that he does owe me money. Yeah. So ولو كان الدين على مقر ملي, if the debt was upon a person who was a muqir, who is admitting that he owes me the money and he's also rich, he has access, or mu'sir, or doesn't have access to the money, تجب الزكاة. Zakat becomes necessary. So that makes sense, that does. So let's say 10 years has gone by. He admits from day one, he admits, not 10 years later, from day one, he admits that he owes me money. And whether he's rich or whether he's poor doesn't matter. Once I get the money, I have to give the zakat. Yeah. What's the reason for this? He says because لإمكان الوصول إليه. The whole idea is, can I get access to it? قدرة, remember, قدرة. So can I get access to that? So he says لإمكان الوصول إليه ابتداءً. In the case of the rich person, let's say Zafar is rich, he had access to the money, £1,000. He could have given that to me, day one. I could have got that easily, but for some reason I was lazy and I didn't really kind of follow him up on that, and that's my fault, that is. So he says لإمكان الوصول إليه ابتداء أو بواسطة التحصيل. أو بواسطة التحصيل means by using a means to get it. So what's that, using the means? As in, let's say Zafar doesn't have the money. He can actually work, gain the money, slowly give it to me. Or he can borrow it off someone else and give it to me. Meaning there is a way that he can get access to that money to give to me. So ibtida'an is referring to in the case where he's rich. Biwasita tahsil, it means by means of him, receiving the money and then giving it to me. So what's the whole point of bringing this masala? Again, Imam Sahib al-Hidayah wants to demonstrate, what does it mean? What are the various scenarios of qudra, of tayassur al-wusul? That's all he wants to know. Give me some examples of tayassur al-wusul, because here you go. Yeah, a guy who actually confesses. Yeah. وَكَذَا لَوْ كَانَ عَلَى جَاهِدٍ وَعَلَيْهِ بَيِّنَةٍ. And likewise is the same if the debt was upon a jahid, someone who was denying. So as Zafar was saying, I don't owe you a penny. But I had proof from day one, I had witnesses that say that he owed me money, but I didn't follow him up. Then I would still have to give zakat on all those years of that money. Yeah, once I get it back, obviously. So this is basically, the concept that we have over here. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later, I'm going to talk about this idea of the debt. Why is it that whenever we get our debt back, right, we only have to give zakat when we get it back? We don't, legally, we don't have to give zakat in the interim period. So in that period of time that we haven't received it back, we don't have to give zakat then. But once we get it back, we have to give it and backdate it, right? If in that period of time there was raja, there was hope that we were going to get the money back, or there was, tayassur al-wusul. Does everyone understand what this means? Or shall I repeat it again? Yeah, so the concept revolves around the same thing that we've been talking about for the past lesson, the last lesson as well, which is the idea of, so I'll repeat it again. Look, so the idea basically is that the Hanafis argue that if you have wealth and that wealth somehow has separated from you, yeah, and you don't have access to it, you can't get access to it, right, and you have very little hope of getting it back, then if 5 or 10 years later you happen to get that money back, you don't have to backdate the zakat. Zakat does not have to be backdated, yeah, because the main thing which makes that wealth zakat necessary on you is mal nami, is productive wealth. And wealth can only be productive if the person has the ability to use it. If you don't have the ability to use money, yeah, then it's non-productive. If it's non-productive, there's no zakat on it. Yeah, that's the whole point over here. So this is why if Zafar owes me money whether he's rich or whether he's poor, if I can prove from day one that he owed me the money, or he admitted from day one that he owed me the money, but doesn't give me for so many years, I still have to give zakat on that money, but I only have to give it once I get it back. Backdate all those years. Yeah, everyone understand? So this is why it says, كَذَا لَوْ كَانَ عَلَى جَاحِدْ وَعَلَيْهِ بَيِّنَةٌ. And likewise is the case, meaning I have to give zakat when the jahid, when the guy who's denying, and there's bayna. Oh, alima bihil qadi. Now, alima bihil qadi, I don't want to go too much into this because this requires kitabul qadi, understanding kitabul qadi. So let's say, for example, like I'm a judge, or let's say, for example, there's a judge. Let's say, for instance, like Amin as a judge. If Amin as a judge, then in a court case, can a judge? So normally, what does a judge do? He calls the plaintiff, calls the defendant, asks the plaintiff, the mudda'i, do you have any proof of what you're claiming? If he says yes, he wins the case. If he says no, then the defendant is asked to swear an oath. If he refuses to swear an oath, then automatically the other party wins. Yeah, that's normally the way it happens. But what if a judge, let's say, for example, knows something about this case? So, for instance, let's say Zafar's got my phone, and I go to Amin and I say to Amin, the judge, I say, look, Zafar's got my phone, and she says to me, okay, provide a witness, and I say, I bring two witnesses, yeah, A and B, and I say, look, can you testify that this phone is mine? And they say, we testify, that this phone belongs to him. The judge will then obviously test, screen the witnesses and say, fine, right, they pass, you win the case. Now, let's say, for example, the judge, Amina, knows this phone is mine, 100% knows it's mine. Like, she knows me, she knows my phone, and she knows that Zafar's taken it. In that case, does she have to call witnesses in this as well? So this is where there's like ikhtilaf amongst the scholars about this issue, because it all depends upon what kind of case it is. But here, he says, O alima bihil qadi. Yeah? If the qadi was to know in this case that yes, that Zafar's, the money that he's got does belong to me. If the qadi knows that, even in that case, I have to give the zakat of the past years as well. So whether it's through iqrar, whether it's through admitting, Zafar admits that he owes me the money, whether I have proof from day one that I owe him the money, that he owes me the money, or whether the judge has prior knowledge of this case and he knows exactly, like he knows that I'm in the right, then in all these situations, zakat. Yeah. Okay. Lima qulna, because of what we said. Now, here he doesn't go any further in this, yeah? However, other Hanafis, remember I said to you, like, think about this now. What kind of potential things can actually really happen in the real world where, like, this theory may fall apart? Yeah, and that's what we need to try and understand. Because fiqh is a theory, isn't it? It's like it's something that doesn't exist in the real world. It's theoretical. It's between the minds of scholars and students and teachers. It kind of whizzes around. The physical world with implementation of fiqh, that requires looking at the masail and looking at the practical implementations of this. So this is where some people sort of like have this understanding that the whole of fiqh is something which applies word for word exactly on earth, and that's not always the case. Sometimes there has to be, like, you have to chop and change, and like sometimes you take the zahir riwayah, sometimes you ghair zahir riwayah, sometimes you have to look at haraj. You've got to look at all these factors before you can implement. So this is why, for example, like some people say, what if Zafar does admit, but he just doesn't give? Yeah, he's just like a very stubborn person, doesn't give, and the authorities won't get involved. Does that count as not having qudra? So some Hanafis say, yeah, that's not qudra. Yeah. Or for example, what if the judge himself has been paid off, like he's a corrupt judge? Yeah, a person who is not gonna help you, and it doesn't allow the case to go through. Yeah. Or something happens in the case and you don't win it. So many things can happen. So their argument is that if anything like this does potentially happen, which is going to affect my rights, then that can also be counted as ta'adhur al-wusul, meaning not having qudra. Does that make sense? I just want to see if so yeah, for example, like, this is in Bahr, right? Okay, I'm going to read what it says over here. So he says, وعن محمد لا تجب الزكاة وإن كان له بينة. He says, zakat is not necessary, zakat will not be necessary upon me, yeah, even if I have proof. لأن البينة قد لا تقبل. Because what might happen is, I might bring my proof to the court, and maybe the court will say, this witness, this guy, his witnessing is unacceptable in our court because of such and such. That can happen. So just because you have a witness doesn't mean that you'll win the case. And then he says, وَالْقَاضِي قَدْ لَا يَعْدِلْ. Sometimes you get a qadi who isn't just, who isn't upright, might be corrupt. Yeah. وَقَدْ لَا يَظْهَرْ بِالْخُصُومَةِ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ لِمَانِعٍ فَيَكُونُ فِي حُكْمِ الْحَالِكِ. And he says, and sometimes what might happen is, the truth might not manifest in the court case, in the dispute, because of some sort of reason, and therefore it's as though that mal is now halik, it's as though it's perished. Yeah, and this has actually been, fatwa has given on this opinion, Imam Muhammad's opinion. He says, Tuhfa, Tuhfat al-Fuqaha has given fatwa on this. Ghayatul Bayan, Qadi Khan, Imam Sarakhsi, yeah, and many others have given on this. So you see how this masala sort of like pans out if you think about it. Like, sometimes we can read a particular masala in a book, but then we have to understand how the fuqaha dealt with that masala, how they, like, really opened it up. Yeah, and now obviously that kind of thing kind of makes sense in our time, because we might get cases where, like in the British court system, it might be too expensive for a person to get like a judge, a lawyer to go to court to fight for some wealth, or it might be some other thing that happens. Does everyone understand that? So these are why I keep saying to you guys, you have to try and think about like what other masail can branch out from this, or other problems that can come out from this. Anyway, that's finished. وَلَوْ كَانَ عَلَى, and then he says, and if there was عَلَى مُقِرٍ مُفَلَّسٍ. Now, this word is mufallas, okay. Now, some versions have actually said muflis. Yeah, muflis, and some versions say mufallas actually makes more sense over here. It's more asah. So he says, وَلَوْ كَانَ عَلَى مُقِرٍ. Let's say, for example, like Zafar, he owes me money. So he's a muqir. He admits, he goes, yes, 100%, I owe you money. Yeah, but the only problem is I am mufallas. So let me explain something to you about this idea of, being liquidated, yeah, or like bankruptcy, yeah. So the Hanafis say in the chapter of Hajar, so there's a chapter in fiqh called Hajar. Hajar basically means restrictions that are put onto certain individuals in the community from financial transactions. So there's 3 types of people who the government, the judge, can issue a Hajar on. Yeah, like freeze their assets, freeze their transactions. So you have a minor, you have a slave, and you have someone who is, majnoon. Okay, these are 3 that can be restricted. But what about a person? Can a person be made bankrupt? So all the Hanafis agree that a person can become bankrupt if they physically have no more mal, no more wealth. Yeah. So for example, like let's say Khalida becomes bankrupt now. Khalida owes people, I don't know, £5,000. She owes different people, altogether £5,000. When she becomes muflis, when she becomes bankrupt, the people cannot demand the money from her anymore. So if she has been declared as being muflis, then people can't ask for the money from her until her status changes and she has the money, then she pays them off. So everyone, Abu Hanifa, Sahib, and they all agree that a muflis, a natural muflis, is a muflis, is someone who is bankrupt and the laws apply to them. However, a mufallas means someone who can the judge declare someone to be a muflis? Can the judge declare someone to be bankrupt or not? Sahibain say yes, they can. The judge has the power to declare someone. Abu Hanifa says no. A judge cannot declare someone to be bankrupt because it doesn't make sense. Bankruptcy is to do with existence and non-existence of wealth. A judge authority can't step in and decide, even though someone has wealth, they decide someone is bankrupt. You can't do that. So you understand this? So now let's go back to this. So let's say, for example, now Zafar, he says he owes me £1,000, but he's been declared, he's gone to the courts, he's filed a document of bankruptcy, and the judges signed it and said, okay, you're bankrupt. So لو كان على مقر مفلس, what if this £1,000 was owed by someone who has officially been declared bankrupt? So Abu Hanifa says I've still got to give zakat, even though Zafar has been declared a bin mufallas. I still have to give zakat. Why? Because Abu Hanifa does not believe that the judge can declare someone to be a muflis. Yeah, you can't do that. So فهو nisabun, meaning that I still have to count that as part of my nisab, my threshold. لأن تفليس القاضي لا يصح عنده, because according to Imam Abu Hanifa, the qadi declaring someone to be a muflis is invalid, is void, right? وعند Muhammad, and according to Imam Muhammad Abu Yusuf, they do allow the qadi to declare someone, but Imam Abu Yusuf and Muhammad have a little split here. Yeah, even though they both allow the qadi to declare someone as mufallas, they have a little split here. So what's the split? So Imam Muhammad says, لا تجب. Yeah, so he just basically says, look, if Zafar does not, if Zafar is muqir and Zafar has been declared a mufallas, that means the mal doesn't exist, and therefore it's like, عدم الوصول, تعذر الوصول, no قدرة, عدم القدرة. لا تجب لتحقق الإفلاس, because iflas has been established. What's iflas? Like we said, iflas is that he's been declared to be a muflis عنده بالتفليس. So natural bankruptcy is the same as being declared a bankrupt by a judge. وأبو يوسف, however, Abu Yusuf is with Imam Muhammad في تحقق الإفلاس. He is with Imam Muhammad when it comes to Zafar being counted as being a muflis, yes. However, he's with Abu Hanifa in the hukum of zakat. So you see how Imam Abu Yusuf shifts here. Now why is this for like theoretically Imam Abu Yusuf should be with Imam Muhammad and say لا تجب الزكاة, zakat should not be necessary on me because this mal is like dimar, عدم القدرة. But he doesn't say that. Why is that? He says because رعاية لجانب الفقراء, because looking at the condition of the fuqara, meaning that if this does happen, if the judge declares someone to be muflis, and I'm not muflis, the muflis is the other guy. So therefore, if I don't give my zakat, the fuqara out there, the poor people out there, are not going to get their money because the zakat belongs to them. Yeah. So all the zakat that we owe, it kind of belongs to the fuqara out there. So he's saying we should take into consideration the state of the fuqara. In other words, so do we take, so here's the sort of like conundrum here. Do we look at the state of Zafar here and say he's a muflis, so therefore that's what we need priority to? That's going to sort of like be the decider in the whole masala. Or do we actually look at the state of the fuqara and we say no, even though Zafar is counted as a muflis, but the fuqara are going to be deprived at the end of the day, because this isn't a totally dimar masala. This is not like a fully dimar masala. It's like in between. Yeah, it kind of like resembles dimar in some ways, and in some ways it doesn't. Yeah, so he says ri'ayatan lil fuqara. Now, some of the later Hanafis have kind of like criticized this argument and said ri'ayatan li janib al fuqara does not seem to be something which is like like an illa that we can use for a hukum in this particular case. Like fuqara have been used when it comes to, for instance, like we're going to discuss this when we talk about, what kind of threshold should you use? Should you use the gold threshold or the silver threshold when you want to calculate your zakat? Silver threshold is about £350. Gold threshold is about £4,000. So should we consider someone to be eligible to give zakat if they have £400 or £4,000? Over there, Abu Hanifa says you look at the ri'ayat al-fuqara. Yeah, you look at what's going to be more anfa' lil-fuqara. But over here, so he says, if you look in the Hashiyah, he says, Fath al-Qadir says, هذا من القضايا المسلمة المسكوت عن النظر فيها. So this is from one of the, this is one of those sort of like arguments that is accepted Yeah, al-maskut an al-nadhar fiha. You don't even have to look at this because everyone knows the whole point of zakat is for the fuqara, is to benefit the fuqara. ما أنها لا تصلح للوجه أصلا. But in reality, this argument cannot, because if we use this argument here, why don't we use it everywhere else? Right? Like that guy who found his wealth, in the desert after 10 years. Why can't we say, oh, well, isn't it better for the fuqara to backdate all your 10 years of zakat? Yeah? And we can use that everywhere, but we don't. Yeah, so it's not consistent, is it? There's no consistency. And Sheikh Suhail Hanif in his PhD on thesis on Hidayah, has actually got, you can read that. It's in English. It's available on. I think I've put it up on the Hidayah classroom. And he actually mentions that the Hanafi madhab is built upon three foundations. One is the foundation of language. Yeah, that the Hanafis focus on language a lot. So this is why you find their usul books filled with discussions on language, how language works. And the second is the argument of the practice of the community. Yeah, the early community, Sahaba, Tabi'in. Yeah, this was something very important, widespread practice. And the third is consistency in fiqh. You have to be consistent in fiqh. Yeah. And this argument doesn't seem to be consistent in fiqh. إذ بمجرد رعاية الفقراء لا يصلح دليل الحكم. He says just taking fuqara into consideration. This doesn't qualify to be a dalil because we need to be consistent with it, and we're not consistent. And again, this is consistency in dalil is very important. Like you'll see this a lot where someone, like nowadays, someone will say, for instance, like, I mean, this is my own position. I mean, if you disagree with me, I don't mind. Birthdays. What's the ruling of having a birthday, celebrating a birthday? I'm not talking about all the extravagance and everything. Put that all to one side. But just simply the argument of a person when their birthday comes, that family get together or they have a meal or something. So to me this seems fine. And some people argue things like it's tashabbuh, you're resembling the kuffar with this. Now, if you are going to use that argument of the tashabbuh kuffar, then you're going to have to use it across the board in everything. Like you have to be consistent. You can't just say it's not allowed in birthdays because tashabbuh's there. But when it comes to other things in life, right, tashabbuh doesn't apply there. Yeah. So again, this seems to be like a problem we have in our times today, where a lot of people will use a particular argument, but they won't use consistency. It won't be like across the board. So this is what he seems to be arguing, Ibn Humam. He's saying, look, if you're going to use this argument, you're going to have to use it across the board, and it doesn't qualify to be a dalil, basically. Okay, everyone understand this? Yeah. Right, next. So that masla is finished, and that is a very important masla. This kind of masla is very important in our time because of lots of people having their money locked in certain transactions or things or financial situations, court cases, blah blah blah. There's so many things that are happening today, and once you understand how this works, then you'll understand where you need backdating. Yeah, where zakat needs to be backdated. So, for instance, pension. When I mentioned to you pension schemes, and I said to you the only pension that you have to give zakat on was defined contribution scheme. Yeah, which was where you appoint a fund manager. Yeah, they give you an options of where you want to invest your money, and once you choose one, you've actually appointed the fund manager to invest that money over there. And other pension schemes, like your workplace pension scheme, where they just take out from your wages and they put into without asking you where you want it to be invested. There's no zakat because that's like dimar. That's like mal dimar. You don't have access to it to spend it, and you haven't appointed a person that can do that for you. Like the company obviously is doing it for you, but you haven't appointed a person that can do it as you want it to be done. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's why there's no sort of zakat on that. Okay, next. وَمَنِ اشْتَرَى جَارِيَةً لِلتِّجَارَةِ. Whoever purchases a jariyah, slave woman, right? So for business. Now, there's no specific sort of reason why it's jariyah. It could be anything. It could be a laptop, it could be a car, it could be. But because in them days, jariyah, slaves were considered to be something that were widely used in the society, That's why they generally bring it in the fiqh books. So let's say, for example, like I buy a slave woman, right? So I bought this slave woman, and I bought her with the pure intention that I'm going to sell her. So I went to the market, I purchased her, and now I'm going to go to sell the slave woman. وَنَوَاهَا لِلْخِدْمَةِ, and a person has intended to sell her. So I intended to sell her, but when I purchased her, I actually decided, you know what, actually I might use her around the house, to cook for me, clean, whatever. So now the question here is, when you make an intention, whenever you buy something and you make an intention that's going to be for tijara, for business purposes, because now that item has now become mal nami, it's become productive wealth, hukman, legally it's become productive wealth, because all business stock, anything that is part of a business, inventory, stock, that is all potentially something which is productive. Yeah. So your intention has made it productive. So therefore that thing should be zakatable now. So let's say I have a business, I buy properties, houses, I fix them up and I sell them. Yeah, that's what I do. Buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. Now if I do this, if I have 5 properties, I've got to give zakat on the value of all the 5 properties. Yeah, because I bought them with the intention of sale. But what if I bought a property to sell, and then all of a sudden I thought, you know what, I might as well live in it. So I lived inside this house. So now what happens to that? So the Hanafis say, batalat anha zakat. The ruling of zakat drops. Yeah. So in other words, when you buy something with the intention of sale, as soon as you buy it, you don't use it for personal use, that item now becomes a zakat asset. Yeah. And if the zakat date comes, you got to give zakat on it. But once you use it for your own personal use, like you bought a phone to sell, and then you decided to use it for yourself, zakat drops from it now. It's no longer a zakatable item. Yeah. And the same goes for like other things, people, they buy things and they wait for the price to go up and then decide to use it themselves. What's the reason for this? So he says, the reason for لِاتِّصَالِ النِّيَّةِ بِالْعَمَلِ. So the Hanafis say, look, in order for an intention to become effective, it has to be accompanied with action. So if, for example, like let's say I've got these headphones. I want to sell these headphones, for example. Okay, I'm going to sell these headphones, all right. Now I've got the intention in my head, but because I didn't buy, because no deal took place, no action, amal took place, that intention for selling is pointless. Yeah. So the fuqaha say that intentions are divided into 2 types of intentions. Intention that requires an amal to be effective, and intentions that don't require amal to be effective. Do you understand? So for example, let's say I'm in salat, and in salat I'm praying, and in my head I decide I've broken my salat. Like in my head I just pray my salat and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not praying salat anymore now, I'm broken it. My salat won't break. Yeah. In order for me to break my salat, I actually will have to do an action that breaks my salat. Yeah. Or the example they give is like, for example, like Islam and kufr. So they say, for example, like, although I have some sort of like objections to this example they give, which is they give an example of, they say, if let's say there's a John, he wants to accept Islam. And in his head, he has the intention of accepting Islam. He won't become a Muslim until he physically does the Muslim thing, which is to say the Shahada. Yeah. But if there's a Muslim and he wants to leave Islam, he just has to intend this, leaving Islam. Now, this is very problematic, this masala they bring. And the reason it's problematic is because, like, the Prophet ﷺ said that a person will not be held accountable for any thoughts that they have, except for that thought which is followed by words or by actions. Yeah. So a person will not be held accountable for their thoughts until the action is there or the words are there as well. Yeah. So this is why, like, a person accepting Islam got nothing to do with niyyah. It's to do with aqidah. Aqidah is different from niyyah. Yeah, aqidah is a belief. Niyyah is a consequence of a belief. Yeah. It's like something that comes out of a belief, after a belief. So that's why this example is no good. This is my opinion. Wallahu alam. The other example they give is going to come a bit later on. It's the musafir masala. Yeah. So we want to know in basically fiqh where an intention sort of like is effective. Like for example, if a man wants to give his wife divorce and he's intended in his head he's giving her divorce. Divorce won't happen. He can in his head he can say 1,000,000 times, "You're divorced, you're divorced, you're divorced" in his head, but it won't happen. It has to be followed by some action in order for divorce to happen. Yeah. And likewise, if a man wants to marry a woman, he can't just in his head just say, "Tazawwajtuki," or in her head she just says "Qabul." There has to be obviously exchange. So he says "Littisal niyati bil amal," because there has to be the ittisal, the connection of niyyah with amal. وهو ترك التجارة. And what's happened over here is ترك التجارة has taken place, as in he's not using it for tijara anymore. Yeah. So in other words, نواها للخدمة, he's intended to use her for khidmah, and he used her for khidmah. So one is, for example, he intended to use her, but he doesn't use her for khidmah. When he uses her for khidmah, in intention of personal use, and also the amal is there. That's why he's saying وهو ترك التجارة. Yeah. So ترك التجارة is actually the amal by using her. Does everyone understand this idea? Yeah. So if you buy something, you go to the city center, you buy something with the intention you're going to sell it to someone else, the item automatically now is zakatable. When does it become non-zakatable? When you make an intention of personal use. Yeah. The same goes for, let's say you buy the house and now you have an intention that you want to go and you want to rent it out to people. Yeah. So you rent it out to others. So again, because you're using it for personal use, like personal doesn't mean your personal as in your business, personal business. It becomes a fixed asset. So now there's no more zakat now. Yeah. وَإِنَّ نَوَاهَا لِلْتِجَارَةِ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ. However, okay, so let's say Monday, I bought a house. Tuesday, I decided I'm going to live in it. And then Wednesday, I changed my mind now and said, I'm going to really sell it now. Yeah. So in نواها للتجارة. So if on Wednesday, he decides to go and sell it, لم تكن للتجارة. It won't be counted as tijara anymore now. So therefore, intention has no effect. Yeah. So لم تكن للتجارة. So why was it that on Monday, the intention of tijara counted, but on Wednesday, the intention of tijara no longer counts? Yeah. So the rule basically is this: anything that you purchase through an exchange, through an exchange, so bay or ijara, that intention is accompanied with amal, so it becomes a zakat asset. But anything which is your personal use, or it's not through any sort of like business exchange, then intention of tijara has no effect. Does everyone understand? Yeah, intention of tijara has no effect. And he's going to give some examples. Like for example, let's say, someone was to, I don't know, someone inherited a property. And then as soon as they inherited it, they intended that they're going to sell it on. Right, then it doesn't count. So he says, وَإِنَّ نَوَاهَا لِلتِّجَارَةِ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ. If he intends it for tijara after that, لَمْ تَكُنْ لِلتِّجَارَةِ. It won't be counted as tijara. حَتَّى يَبِيعَهَا. So on Wednesday, it won't be counted as tijara. What he will have to do, he'll have to sell it, and then the money that he acquires from that sale, if he has that money on his zakat day, he's got to give zakat on it. And if he doesn't have it, then he doesn't have to give zakat. Yeah, فَيَكُونْ فِي ثَمَنِهَا zakat. In which case, the money that's been taken in exchange, that's going to be zakatable. Why is this for? لِأَنَّ النِّيَّةَ لَمْ تَتَّصِلْ بِالْعَمَلِ. So the argument is that the intention was not accompanied with an amal. So on Monday there was niyyah with the amal, which was niyyah with tijara. On Tuesday there was niyyah with tarku tijara. But on Wednesday there was only niyyah on Wednesday. إِذْ هُوَ لَمْ يَتَّجِرْ فَلَمْ تُعْتَبَرْ. Because he wasn't doing a tijara on Wednesday, so therefore the intention can't work. فَلَمْ تُعْتَبَرْ. If he wants to make that house a zakat asset on Wednesday, what he'll have to do is he'll have to sell it to someone, then buy it back off them with the intention that he's going to resell it, for that. وَلِهَذَا. Then he gives an argument, which is just like a general fiqh argument of how intention does not have an effect unless there is amal. لهذا يصير المسافر مقيما بمجرد النية. Yeah, so a musafir can actually become muqim. So let's say, for example, I travel, I leave Birmingham, and let's say I go to Manchester. I've gone to Manchester to stay there for a few days. So as long as I'm in Manchester for a few days, let's say 3 or 4 days, I'm a musafir there. Okay? But if I decide to stay in Manchester, amal, with the intention of 15 days, then I now become muqim. Yeah? So لهذا يصير مسافر. That's why a musafir actually becomes a resident بمجرد النية, by simply doing niyyah. However, the opposite, a muqim does not become musafir illa بالسفر. Say a person who is a muqim, he can't become a musafir unless he travels. So I cannot become musafir. Sitting here, I can't become a musafir now. Even if I make 100 intentions in my head that I'm going on safar now, I'm going on safar, I have to leave the boundaries of my city, with the intention of 3 days journey to become musafir. Does everyone understand that? Okay, again, so if you kind of like think about this, what you need to try and get your head around is this idea in just a gist. You just need to get your head around this idea of the effectiveness of niyyah on its own. How much does niyyah actually have an impact on things? Yeah, so one is niyyah having an impact on reward. إنما الأعمال بالنيات, it's to do with reward, this is. Yeah, or the sihat of amal, of whether amal is going to be acceptable or not. Yeah, that's what the hadith is talking about. What we're talking about is this idea of how much does niyyah have an impact on a'mal themselves in becoming one thing to another. Yeah, so this is what he was talking about. Okay, let's see if there's any. Okay, just to mention one thing, the ikhtilaf we talked about, that in your own garden, if you bury wealth in your own garden, do you have to dig it up and all that? This ikhtilaf was actually in the mashayikh of Bukhara. So, in Tashkent, yeah, or Kazakhstan, that area over there, the Hanafis that used to live there, they had this ikhtilaf. They were the first people to seem to have raised this ikhtilaf, and some said yes and some said no. Okay. That was one thing. Okay, now you see some books in the Masala, where it says Mali, when we said Muqir Mali, when I said to you Zafar owes me £1,000 and he admits it and he's rich, he has possession of the money. Yeah. Some nuskhas, some books actually say that Imam Muhammad actually said, if a person has a debt on a wali, lo kana debt ala walin. So wali, a walin meaning like someone who is a governor, someone who's a governor. Governor owes someone money, and then he says annahu la yu'ti wa qad talabahu, and then he goes to the court to the Khalifa, and he tells the Khalifa this, and the Khalifa isn't doing anything about it. Then there's no zakat upon him. And he also mentioned another interesting masala. Let's say, for example, Zafar owes me £1,000, and I've contacted him and he's run away. He deliberately is avoiding my calls. He's running away. He's gone into hiding. Then there's no zakat. Yeah, over there as well. This is mentioned in Radd al-Muhtar. He brings a few examples of this. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Right, let's just. So, if you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. All right. So, just to summarize what we covered today. So, we talked about this idea of malud dimar, and we said that Imam Shafi's argument is that the malud dimar does not impede on a person's zakat. He still have to give zakat. And he used the argument of the possession. He says the sabab is there, mal nami, and ownership. And he used the example of the Ibn Sabil, the traveller, who doesn't have access to his wealth, Yet still we say that he has to give zakat of all the years that he's been away. So how do we respond to this? So we said the idea of mal al-dimar, it all boils down to the ability to be able to use the wealth. If you don't have the ability to use the wealth, then it's not mal nami anymore. It's not productive wealth. So it's pointless. You can't be zakat on it. Yeah. Because then that would mean that, for years, zakat will be taken out until it diminishes totally. And what about mal that has been buried in your house somewhere? What about that? So his argument is that yes, he has to give zakat because there's easy access to it. Okay, what about mal that's been buried in your garden, outside your property, in your own property, or in like a vineyard that you own? He said ikhtilaf of mashayikh, the mashayikh referring to the mashayikh of, like we said, Bukhara. And what about a person who owes a debt, admits whether he's rich or poor, and many years goes by, he's got to give zakat. Yes, I've got to give zakat of that. Why? Because it all boils down to tayassur al-wusul. I can get access to it. And what if I, have proof, but I was just lazy not to go to the courts and present the proof? Or the judge knew about this case. Again, the same thing. I have to give zakat on it. Okay, what if Zafar, he confessed, he admitted that he owes me the money, but he was declared officially bankrupt. So according to Sahibain, according to Abu Hanifa, I still have to give zakat. Yeah, because he doesn't believe in a judge declaring someone bankrupt. According to Imam Muhammad, no zakat. Yeah, because he accepts that. According to Abu Yusuf, he should be on Imam Muhammad's side, but he's not. He actually takes Abu Hanifa's side, and he used the argument of ri'ayat li-janib al-fuqara. Yeah, look at the fuqara's, give them a priority. Okay, what if a person buys something with the intention of selling? Does he have to give zakat? Yes, it becomes zakatable. But then what if he changes his intention to something else? So then there's no zakat, because anything that you buy with the intention and amal come together. So therefore now it becomes zakatable. And then once you use it for personal use and you intend it for personal use, yeah, so you intended that you're going to use it for, then, so this is why, like, for example, let's say, what if someone buys a property, is going to sell it, but just in the interim period, they're going to sell it, in a year's time, but in the interim period, they've just got some lodgers, some tenants to rent it from them. Yeah, so here's where we'll discuss this next time, inshallah. Yeah, about this. Is this considered to be still for sale, or does it now come under? So in other words, if you use it for your personal use, but you haven't intended to use it for personal use, then does that make a difference or not? And then we said that what if a person, let's say on Wednesday, decides now to go and sell it again now, wants to sell it. Does it now return and become zakatable asset or not? We said no, because there's no amal attached to it. And the example they give is like the musafir becoming a muqim. You can become a muqim with intention, with pure intention. Yeah, لهذا يصير المسافر مقيما بمجرد النية. We simply just making an intention. Yeah, because he's staying in that location there. And he's left safar. And the muqim, on the other hand, cannot become a musafir unless he actually has intention and goes on a safar. We're going to talk a bit more about this tomorrow, inshallah. I'll give some more examples. Any questions? Yeah, and like I said, I've gone through some of your assignments, mashallah, very good. And the benefit of assignments, when I give the assignments, you're going to see this yourself. It's gonna give you more insight into the fiqh itself, because you have to think how I'm gonna write this. Ideally, what you need to do when we cover each chapter, you need to write some sort of article on it. So you just choose one masala, one aspect, and then you write about it, and that way it develops your faqahat as well. So, because writing helps, writing and discussion, all these things, they help faqahat. They all develop faqahat. So if you're, for example, just passively accepting the lessons, writing your notes down, but you're not actively discussing this with people or having discussions or writing, your faqahat is going to be stunted. You won't develop your ability to be able to really kind of analyze things. Okay, guys, take care. Inshallah, see you guys tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.